Just if you were to do a lot of persuasion.
So, Dr. Martin is going to overview. Then I'll put it before you first.
Okay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you in the Václav Havel Library on a project which is in cooperation with Forum 2000. And the title of this panel discussion is Imperfect Democracy, Václav Havel Concerns about the Development of Democracy. First, I would like to say something about the library, because we are one of the institutions which was established to save and develop the legacy of Václav Havel. We have the documentation archive, which is the most important our work. We are collecting documents of Václav Havel and about him, documents from the time when he was working. Also, we are publishing books and we organize events. And beside that, we are also organizing several projects which have international dimension. One of is the prize, Václav Havel Human Rights Prize, which is a project organized in cooperation with Council of Europe. And this is something which really saved the legacy of Václav Havel in the human rights field. The project is open worldwide, and last year was the first year where the winner was announced. It was Aleš Bialický, who attended also the Forum 2000. And just 2 weeks ago we have had announced the second winner, Anar Mammadli, Azerbaijani dissident who is currently in the prison. He was very happy that Aleš Bialický, who was in prison last year, was allowed to go out in June this year, and also we was hoping that the prize helped him to be free. This is not everything, so we have also the Václav Havel European Dialogues, which is a series of conferences discussing the Europe as a task, as a project, and also it's focusing on the democracy in Europe as the area which could offer the democratic thinking to other parts of the world. We know how difficult it is. It was discussed also today and yesterday in the Forum 2000. But we are not the only institution who is caring for the legacy of Václav Havel. The Forum 2000, the idea was created by Václav Havel as a platform for discussion, for meetings, for gathering people from all around the world to discuss issues connected with freedom, democracy, with current ultimate issue connected with our world. I have to mention also the People in Need Foundation, which Václav Havel very much like it, and it's an organization who in praxis also work with people supporting human rights, supporting the humanitarian help, and they are operating in many countries in the world. We are not only in the Czech Republic. 2 years ago was established in New York, the Václav Havel Library Foundation. I am very happy that here is John SHATTUCK, who actually is also director of Central European University, founded by George Soros. And George Soros was one of the important sponsor or donor of Charta 77 during the 80s. So this is really a connection also with our descent, and John SHATTUCK today, I hope, in Central European University also is one holder of this legacy of the Czechoslovakian and Polish descent who George Soros supported very well in that time. We have here Michael ŽANTOVSKý, who currently published a biography of Václav Havel. It's one of the first books who is dealing with whole life of Václav Havel. He was a close friend and colleague of him, and the book will be published just this month in 10 languages together, and other translation are in preparation, so it's really a big project. It was written first in English, and he, as a very good translator, translated himself into the Czech. Tomáš VRBA, who is the chief of board of directors of Forum 2000, will moderate the event, and Jan Macháček is the chairman of board of trustees of Václav Havel Library. And I will give you the floor to continue the discussion and to run the panel.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like just to add some details about our panelists. John SHATTUCK is not only the current rector of the Central European University, but he used to be in his previous career the vice president of Harvard University, and then he also served in the American diplomacy, and he served as an ambassador to Czech Republic between years 1998 to 2000. Yeah. And Michael ŽANTOVSKý has a series of other hats. One of them is the presidency of Aspen Institute Prague, while Jan Macháček, beyond being the chairman of the board of directors of Václav Havel Library, is a prominent analyst and journalist for both Hospodářské noviny and Respect Weekly, journalist and rock musician. That is not to be neglected. All of us used to meet Václav Havel in different roles, in different situations, before 1989 and after. And I'm not going to ask you to tell us your personal experiences. The theme of our panel is strictly declared, being Imperfect Democracy, Václav Havel's concerns about the development of democracy. And organizers suggested two questions. What were Havel's main concerns about our current democracy? And second, how has he seen its future? We may focus also on two different aspects of Havel's own perception of democracy. First, the view of a democratic politician trying to bring democracy back, to build democratic structures, and the quite contrary perspective of a modern intellectual deliberating freely about the past and future of one of possible forms of rule. I'd like to give the floor first to the man who had the advantage of the perspective from outside. However friendly his outside might be. John, please.
Thank you, Tomáš. Thank you very much. It's a great privilege for me and for Ellen, my wife here, who's in the front row, to be here, to be in the Václav Havel Library. For many years, I've watched the concept of the library grow, and now it's a reality. I, as was said earlier, serve on the board of trustees of the Václav Havel Library Foundation in the United States. So coming here is a kind of special pilgrimage as we open the library with this panel, at least in my view. I know it's been opened earlier. And it's a pilgrimage because there were so many memories that came back, and I won't recount them because that will open up all the other memories. And of course, Michael Żantovský has written an entire biography of Václav Havel, but just to say that when I walked into the library upstairs and saw the books, Havel's own personal library books, I could remember seeing them behind him, both at Czech and then also when he had left the presidency and had his office right near here. I can't remember the exact address. So it's a kind of remarkable, just, there it is, okay. I thought this looked familiar, so it's in this very place. This is in a sense dedicated, of course, to Václav Havel and to this library. It's at least my participation here. Let me just make three areas of brief remarks, because I know we want to have a discussion here about this very large topic. Let me look first at what I think, as I read all of Havel's works, over the years I've read, I can't say that I've reviewed them all in preparation for this, but what his main concerns were about democracy, the areas of concern that he had, which I think were, as he had these concerns, some of them quite early when he was writing, even when he was, before he was president, when he was still a dissident. I think they've come true in some respects, and they are part of the universal challenges of democracy. The first area is economic, and I think he would have put it in terms of the materialism that is so much a part of liberal democracy and liberal markets, and the way in which economic development occurs, and the danger that economics will end up being the trade-off for some of the more specific elements of democracy, either by making those who are participants very attracted to their material well-being and less interested in participating in democracy, or rather turning them into powerful interest groups that will try to overwhelm the democracy. So I think this whole area of economic development and the way in which materialism can engulf democratic values was one big concern of his. The second big concern was security, which is security. We're all insecure all the time as we move around in a world that is producing everything from Ebola to terrorism and difficulties right nearby in all kinds of different ways. Some of them physical conflicts, violent conflicts, and some of them just more problematic conflicts. So the issue of security and how one could try to do too many things to satisfy that security in ways that would sacrifice democracy. And I think we see that in my own view right now, coming from the Western response to terrorism, particularly driven by the United States, where a very large amount of privacy and some degree of freedom has been given up in the name of security, and some terrible things have been done which are completely inconsistent with democracy, such as long-term imprisonment of suspects without sufficient evidence or without trial is more the point. Then I would say a third area that was of concern to him was what I would call fear of the other. We're always looking at other people and wondering whether they are going to be compatible with us. And in a society where the other is often very different from us, let's say particularly Roma people who are living in Eastern and Central Europe, and the sense that they are so different from us and they are problems from us that we're going to end up separating ourselves from us. This is a human instinct that develops into xenophobia, racism, extreme nationalism, and it's another area that can overwhelm democracy. Finally, I would say the fourth area is propaganda, which is the manipulation of truth and facts in order to get people to respond in particular ways, Certainly the control of media is one element of that, but developing narratives that are going to be very different from other people's narratives, and thereby creating a sense of division which can also overwhelm democracy. All of these concerns, I think, are very well founded, and they are based in human nature. So what I would say, just as a second point, looking beyond these specific concerns to how they've manifested themselves these days in the last 25 years, which is the period we're really looking at here, since the changeover after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Velvet Revolution. We have seen various forms of perverted democracy that has become significantly perverted. And it's been perverted by the fear of terrorism, very justified. It was perverted by 9/11 and the reaction in the United States to 9/11. It was perverted by the financial crisis and the fear and concerns that people had about their own economic well-being following the financial crisis. I think there are elements of globalization which have to do with putting much more emphasis on development and transnational involvement of economic development in ways that undermine democracy. So all of these things have happened over the last 25 years, and people naturally are looking for security, they're looking for simplicity, they're looking for their own identity, and they can easily be seduced into these perverted forms of democracy, which come out in a variety of ways. There are authoritarian models, and we certainly see that in Russia. We see that in the Putin model, we also see it in Turkey in the Erdogan model, and we see it in Hungary in the Orban model, which is an authoritarian democracy, elected leaders who end up controlling, by virtue of controlling all of the various elements of the government apparatus, what is going on. I think the particular form, of course, is the Putin model that we look at most closely in that regard. Then there's the majoritarian model of democracy, which may look quite democratic, but it means that the majority is controlling everything. And minorities end up being put on the sidelines. There are no protections of minorities, whether they're racial minorities or political minorities or what have you, in the majoritarian model. Then you have the nationalist model, which appeals to fear and to some degree to racism, of creating the sense of the other. And then, of course, you have the economic models of unregulated markets, whereby certain people get very wealthy and everyone else gets left behind, and that creates huge inequalities, and that can also lead to severe undermining of democracy. But not to leave out the form of democracy we tend to think of as the best form, which is constitutional democracy. That too can be perverted, and it can be perverted, unfortunately, from within. It can be undermined by powerful interest groups who are able to get better access to the levers of power than others are. It can be undermined by money in politics generally flowing to political candidates. It can be undermined by, as I said earlier, national security concerns and interests, which end up producing severe restrictions of civil liberties and civil rights. And it can be undermined by bureaucratic remoteness, which we see in the European Union to a large extent, where Brussels seems very remote from national democratic systems. And it can be undermined by ideological partisan separation, as is frankly the case right now in the United States, where there's a deep division between the two principal political parties, which has created a gridlock in the United States Congress, whereby very little can get acted upon. So that's the bad news. Now let me just very quickly give the good news, because I think there is good news coming out of all of this. And frankly, this is what this whole Forum 2000 event has been about. I think there are answers to these concerns. You know, the first answer is open debate, which is what we're engaged in here. Genuine open debate and discussion of these kinds of problems. And I'm pleased to announce, and I hope that this will be something that we'll do in collaboration to some extent with the Forum 2000, that Central European University has launched a 2-year program of conferences and debates and discussions and research called Frontiers of Democracy, where we're going to look at all of these problems. We're going to get all the different points of view to come to bear on them, and we're going to discuss them openly, so we don't simply sit on them and worry about them, but not engage with them. The second positive thing, I think, is education, more generally. And this has been a theme that we've heard a good deal of during the 2 days of the Forum 2000 conference, particularly in the case of Russia, I think, is the need for young people to be educated in a broad context with respect to principles of democracy, traveling outside of their own countries, and then often going back. This is something that we do all the time at Central European University, where we have students from over 100 countries, 70% of whom return to their own countries. Sometime in the next several months, I will be traveling to Moscow to meet with the alumni of our university. And it's a very exciting opportunity to continue this debate and to see what they are doing. Many of them, I think, are concerned about developments in their own country. And then I would say, finally, the deepest answer to all of these problems is human nature itself. Because I think human beings, underneath it all, and I think we have plenty of evidence of this in history, want to be free. They want to be free from the kind of authoritarian or restrictive governmental activities that come to bear. And I think there's no more powerful example than the Velvet Revolution and what happened here 25 years ago this month. People are always tempted to trade their freedom for security, and they're tempted to trade it for comfort or for simplicity. But I would say that the long arc of history shows otherwise. It shows otherwise in so many different ways that human destiny is, in fact, to be free. And you look around and you look at the events that have occurred over the last 25 years, they're not only the kind of negative events that I cited earlier, but there are also these extraordinary expressions of democratic, powerful democratic movements in every part of the world. They started in some ways in 1989 here, but they continue. And we've seen them obviously recently in Euromaidan, we've seen them in Hong Kong, we've seen them in many places. People want to be free. So I would say freedom is best expressed in democracy, which comes in many varieties, and it's very important to know that it can neither be imported, it needs to be grown from within, nor can it be imposed. It certainly can't be imposed from without. Democracy has to come from within. So let me just close by quoting Václav Havel, not surprisingly, who I think sort of summed this up best by the following. And I will probably paraphrase, because whenever I said this to him, he said, no, that's not exactly the way I said it. And this is something I heard him say, and I don't think I've seen it written anywhere. So here's what it is. He said, I am not an optimist because I do not believe that all ends well. Nor am I a pessimist because I do not believe that all ends badly. Instead, I am a realist who carries hope, and hope is the belief that freedom has meaning and is always worth the struggle. So those are my thoughts about Havel's views of the future.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. I believe that a lot of us will share your optimism. I'll probably claim some small reserve about the third point, the human nature. Human nature, as we all know, has at least two faces. But let's be optimistic. I have to excuse Martin Butora. He had to cancel his trip to Prague, and you may know that Martin Butora was a close friend to Václav Havel and his advisor for human rights issues in early 90s. Later he was a Slovak ambassador to Washington. And should it be here, I'd ask him about the following thing. Maybe some of you will react about it a little bit, Martin, as a sociologist, knew and knows very well the mentalities of both Czechs and Slovaks. And my question would be, what was the core of the problem at the time? Why a part of Slovak political elites has distinctly distanced itself from Václav Havel's attempts to arrange a new Czechoslovak democracy? Was it a failure of just nationalists, or was it something premature in starting to reinstall a modern Western-type democracy? The question is still open. Martin is not here. I'm going to write him an email and add happy birthday wish. He was just 70. Okay, so we cannot tell him now. Honza Macháček, in spite of being also had the chair of board of directors of Václav Havel Library, he is not a bureaucrat. You can be sure. And what I am sure of is that he has his own perspective on the theme Václav Havel and democracy. On the proceed.
Okay, thanks, Tomáš. I wasn't writing SMS when John was speaking. I was taking some notes, and my gadget is just a little bit smaller than so. Speaking about like Havel's fears and concerns about democracy and his ideas about democracy, I would start like with this, that he was actually not only during the revolution but much before, obviously, but most of the public could hear it first, like during the Velvet Revolution, that he was always emphasizing that the most important thing in democracy is the network of NGOs, civic society, flourishing civic society. He was always, since he was a writer, he always found a new way to express it, this like sort of fertile soil of NGOs, and perhaps Michael can later, since he is now much bigger expert on Havels than anybody, speak about where it was coming from. But I think he was speaking like an American in a way. He was speaking like someone who read Alexis de Tocqueville from when he was very young. But I think it was a combination of a few things. One thing was the family tradition that he knew from his ancestors, that they always emphasize that it's very important that people are active and they get united voluntarily, and they remember it from the First Republic and from before, and they represent a class of very, very active citizens, very courageous entrepreneurs. His father himself also visited the United States, and he was very much inspired by this. So this is one thing. And another thing, the reason probably was that he knew the absurdity of the regime here in the 70s and 80s, that whenever anyone met voluntarily, like 5 or 6 people met somewhere very voluntarily and started to do something authentically, spontaneously, the regime never understood it. They always thought that it must be organized by someone else. And Havel had by some whatever foreign agents but Havel had a sense of absurdity and by what's like absurd paradox, and he felt how absurd it is that if people who want to speak normally with each other and or start a band or a group of poets or whatever, painters, and they speak and are discussing authentically, and the regime is always suspected that someone must be organizing it. So that's why I believe he realized how important it is that even though there is no communism anymore, but there can be some kind of government which would be equally suspicious towards these activities. So I just wanted to emphasize that Havel could never imagine democracy without this flourishing network of NGOs, and I think he would be quite happy now because new generation of Czechs are really very active in creating new NGOs and are very active. I think that after the generation of 90s, where everybody wanted to be like whatever successful capitalist, like new generation of people who are 25, 30, I believe that a lot of their leaders want to succeed in NGOs, and I am convinced that Havel would appreciate it. Very important also for his reflection of democracy was that, and once again he looked like an American in this respect, whereas he knew about the importance of checks and balances from the very beginning and of some proportional representation. And I think it was a lie. He wasn't reading like American constitutional thinkers. It was just like his intuition, his experience from dissent from Charter 77, that there was this tradition speaking about like Charter 77, for instance, having 3 speakers. So Havel was one of the people who had an impact of this system, on the system of speakers, and he was always very careful that one of the speakers is I don't know, Catholic, second is representing young generation, third one is representing like what we call Reform Communist. And in a new round it was a little bit different. And naturally when he became the president, it was obvious to him that if he names the justices of the Constitutional Court, that he would be very careful that one of them is coming out of real judges. Some of them are like sociologists, some of them are former dissidents, some of them are... so he was, and the same about the board of the central bank. He was always very careful that there is a colorful representation of different backgrounds, different attitudes, different opinions, and he was always very careful about it. And he didn't have to be a scholar of whatever, like Farid Zakaria or Fukuyama, whatever. He just naturally felt that this is his role as a president. He should be very careful about it. And it's very interesting that after new president Klaus came to power, he completely canceled the system. So to the board of the central bank, he named people who had to like follow his Eurosceptic opinions. It was actually interestingly different with the Constitutional Court, because Constitutional Court revealed that it really has its sort of professional prestige and heritage, which was somehow already rooted, and even though new justices named by Klaus, they very frequently oppose him, even though it was he who named it. So checks and balances. I think Havel very often spoke about danger of kleptocratic capitalism or gangster capitalism. So I don't really have to explain it. I think he would still be speaking about it. And he would, because it's re-emerging like every few years, there's like a new version of sort of gangster or kleptocratic capitalism, and you always have to fight. So in this country it's completely different now than it was in the 90s when everyone was sort of tunneling the banks. These days tunneling is sort of forgotten expressions, but we have different expressions and different methods. So if he was alive, he would definitely be warning against mafia kind of capitalism, because it was a very important topic. Very interesting topic is, and also Michael definitely knows much more about it, is his deep mistrust of political parties. Where it was coming from, because it's there like much before any velvet revolution was on the horizon. It's presented in his most important essays, like Power or the Powerless. And so I think it also is in his place, definitely, because he was very much worried, and it's connected with the democracy also, that he really had a sensitivity for people who speak some kind of a ritual empty language, and there are people who are just pretending they are speaking in real. And I think that somehow it reminded him of the world of like political, well-organized political parties, like full of ideologues and full of people who are speaking of this like sort of pretentious, empty language. And in this respect, I think that because we shouldn't speak about Havel as someone who never was mistaken, I think that he was partially mistaken in this respect. And but he definitely always was thinking about things like in a very responsible way, and he was a very good analyst. But I think that he was afraid of the world that we would have political parties, like sort of Orwellian political parties, which would control everything. And into an extent, it exists like this in classical democracies, that you have young social democrats, and if you are 50 and you become a prime minister, it's very probable that you were, when you were 16, you were a leader of young social democrats or young Labour Party, and here and there, and you would have political parties which control everything and have a lot of members and young organizations and everything. But it developed into something completely different in this country. Even though Linda Jablonska did a documentary film 10 years ago about young youth organization of political parties, this world is gone these days. There are no youth organizations anymore. Political parties are not interested in young people at all. They are not recruiting new members at all. And political parties transform themselves basically into more or less, I'm afraid, for classical political parties in this country, into some kind of racketeering organizations in a way. That if you want to succeed and go from the bottom to the up, you have to contribute to the party in a certain manner. And how can you contribute to the party without like collecting some kind of bribe? So this system is completely different than Havel was afraid of, I think. And paradoxically, when I was speaking about NGOs and political parties, now political parties, traditional political parties, which never were traditional because in political parties in these countries have basically no members, like these sort of traditional or classical political parties, they have like 20,000 members, whereas in Austria, which is not an example of a nice political culture to me, but political parties in Austria have hundreds of thousands of members, still, even though the membership is in decline. But suddenly these sort of so-called classical political parties were overruled in this country by these new protest movements. And it's very paradoxical, but some of these protest movements even say that we are this civic society. We are not political parties, we are NGOs in a way. We are movements. How can you say that we disrespect Havel? We actually do what Havel wished, but he definitely wouldn't have wished these movements, but we don't have him here to say something like sharply analytical and funny about ANO movement, about this and that. I think he would definitely he would say something interesting and something smart. We just can only dream of what he would say. Okay. And I think that absolutely crucial is the fact that Havel was always speaking that democracy has to have something, that leaders have to be humble, they have to think about something which is above us, about transcendency, because otherwise it doesn't make much sense to him. He was speaking about democracy which has to have some values, some sort of noble values, and he was very often speaking about the European democracy above all being like very empty without having any noble goals. He would frequently criticize Europe about politicians speaking only about GDP and this. In this respect, it's a little bit complicated once again, because if you speak only about GDP, it sounds, and in this respect, Havel once again was controversial, but it's definitely stupid to be like some kind of a technocrat who speaks about of growth and GDP only. But if you translate GDP into employment and labor, it becomes more complicated, because if someone would speak that his goal is that you have a low unemployment and you have young people have jobs, etc., it suddenly doesn't sound like so stupid like GDP growth. But his emphasis of lack of any like noble aspirations and values, and democracy becoming absolutely empty, leading nowhere, was absolutely his definitely his crucial point of his basically analysis of the political system. But I was probably speaking too long. So.
Thank you, Jan. I like especially your observation that Václav Havel tended to organize the society around him even long before 1989. He was a small-scale organizer. That was his concept of small pieces, step-by-step changes. And I'd like just to add that some people suspect that it was rather his theater director nature to direct the social or political play. Maybe that it's a bit of both in it, and the team politics as theater would be also a nice team sometimes in the future. Michael Žantovský is today, willingly or not, the best expert on Václav Havel in the near and middle universe, at least. But I'm sure that it doesn't prevent him from sharing with us his strong opinion about Václav Havel, a Democrat.
Well, thank you, Tomáš. I have to start with a word of thanks. It's I'm very pleased to be here in the Václav Havel Library, and not just because it's the repository of the legacy of Václav Havel, but MARTA and Tomáš have mentioned this little book I've been writing, and I was writing it in London. And it's very difficult to write a biography of someone when all the papers, all the documents, all the letters are 2,000 kilometers away. And thanks to the library, I had remote access to its vast collection of digitized documents and archives, and I'm very glad that some of the people who helped me, MARTA, SMOLÍKOVÁ, others are in this room. So it's only thanks to them that the book got finally written. Now the bad news I have is a problem that I didn't quite expect, but I'm afraid I have very little to say, because after almost 3 years of writing Havel, eating Havel, sleeping Havel, I find it somewhat difficult even to pronounce the word Havel. I developed some kind of a block, but fortunately my predecessors, both John and Jan, were so eloquent and covered most of the grounds that I would cover myself, that I will only revisit some of the points. I think the most important things about understanding Havel's approach to democracy and his concerns for the current state and the future of democracy was his belief that in the moral underpinning of all human activity, including political activity, and that also informed his view of people. I agree with what John said, that he didn't think of people as good or bad in themselves, but he did believe that they had a moral responsibility everybody had to do as best as they can, and this was the source of the hope that John has also mentioned in that quote, which appears in a number of places in different versions, but basically what Havel said time and again is that the hope is a belief that something has meaning regardless of whether it pays off, regardless of the ultimate result, and that informed his life as a political activist, as a dissident, and also as a president. He did have some concerns about democracy, and Jan rightly said that they preceded his presidency, that they were there already in some of his essays from the 70s and the 80s in The Power of the Powerless in particular, and they remained pronounced when he became president. And they often revolved around the dual character of democracy. On the one hand, as what he liked to call the technology of power, as a process, set of rules, set of institutions, etc., and which, in his view, did not have much to do with the ultimate purpose of being free in a democracy, which was for Havel simply to live an authentic life. Havel never developed a political utopia as to how the world should look like and how the world should be organized and how people should be happy from now on. But he believed that unlike in authoritarian and totalitarian regimes where people are forced to live inauthentic lives, as he put it, in a democracy they have a chance, not a guarantee of living an authentic life. And from this stem some of his concerns and questioning about some of the democratic institutions, the political parties in particular, because he, in The Power of the Powerless, he asked whether the political parties run by bureaucrats and secretariats can really be the way to maximize the authenticity of one life, and he proposes something slightly more individualistic, based on responsible individuals, based on individual types of selecting and electing democratic representatives, and this led to one of the huge quarrels right at the beginning of the Czechoslovak democracy in early 1990 about the nature of our electoral system, in which he and I and a number of others advocated a majority type voting system, and we were beaten badly by people who thought that the system of proportional representation is the best thing since the invention of the wheel. But also that's slightly ironic, and it is a controversial part of his writings. In The Power of the Powerless, he proposes a new, different type of political parties based on perhaps one-time goals or ideas, which parties, a group of people coming together to attain a specific goals and then dispersing again or creating another such group. And you could say that we've seen some of these groups grow in influence in the recent elections in this and in other countries, unlike the traditional political parties. And it is a good question whether Havel would identify this with some of their goals or some of what they propose. But it is probably true, and I do say that in the book that Havel underestimated the role of traditional political parties as possible carriers of certain political values and amplifiers of their program with respect to the general population. So this is one concern, the economic concerns that he had and that developed during his presidency, and most notably in his 1997 speech to the parliament, were concerned about political mafias or political economic mafias, etc., etc. And he had an impression that the political system is doing very little, if anything, to stop that from developing. The emphasis that he put on civil society and civil society groups cannot be overemphasized, because that was one of the pillars of his thinking, and it also predates, as Jan said, his presidential life, and in some respects it goes to the ideas of parallel culture and the islands of positive deviation, or whatever we call them in those days. But I wonder whether he would be entirely happy with the state of the civil society at the moment, because I think you can. I don't think you can ignore that. One thing that was very important for him in civil society was the ability to stay independent and to again, in the interest of authentic life, and to pursue their goals independently of the government and of the political structures, etc., etc. If you look at NGOs these days, I've learned in England, I've learned a wonderful new word, quango, that's quasi-NGO. Those are NGOs that are financed by the government or the European Commission or combination of various public bodies, and they are often tasked to research and publicize their views about the governments and the European Commission, etc., etc. And one, has to question whether this is the best way to go about it. But I'm so happy that this is something that does not concern the Václav Havel Library and the Aspen Institute Prague. So, at least. Security. I'm not 100% certain whether I would wholly agree with John, because Havel had some pronounced ideas about security, and it counts among some of his most controversial moments, because he believed very strongly in the need for a democracy to defend itself, and to defend itself not only within our own countries, but to take the joint responsibility for the defense of democracy and human rights and human values wherever they threatened. And he, in several speeches and statements on the subject in crisis situations like the situation around former Kosovo or former Yugoslavia and the crisis in Kosovo, Iraq in 2003, etc., etc. He came out in support of military action against what he saw as threats to democracy and human rights in the name of explicitly, as he put it, inadmissibility of appeasing evil. I mean, there are two types of political thinkers, those who do not believe in evil and think that everybody is basically good and have the best intention, and that the source of evil is that people misunderstand each other. And then there are people, politicians, who do believe that there is such a thing as evil, and that evil has to be confronted, has to be defeated. In Havel, this can be clearly traced to the Munich crisis of 1938 and to the fate of the first Czechoslovak Republic at the hands of the Nazis and then at the hands of the communists in 1948. And many people criticize him for that. I defend him on that count. I think it's one of the reasons probably he never won a Nobel Peace Prize, because he doesn't quite fit the profile. But I claim it says more about the Nobel Peace Prize than it says about Havel. So I will end up on that note and leave some room for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So we had already some reactions. Michael was referring to John's comments. John, you were taking notes. Would you like to fire back?
Yeah, the last point is a very interesting one. The issue of security. I didn't really explain it fully in my earlier remark, but let me elaborate a little bit now. I think Michael and I still may have some disagreement, but I would distinguish between defending democracy against outside enemies, or rather defending it also in situations where it can't defend itself, which is what is now known in the context, say, of Kosovo or Bosnia, in which I was very personally involved in engaging militarily, bringing the U.S. and NATO into that. Distinguish that from the security apparatus that is intended to operate inside a country. And that is what I find most dangerous to democracy, the latter version, not the former version. In other words, if the certainly don't need to say here where the security apparatus was strangling Czechoslovakia for so many years, how dangerous that is. That's, I think, what is the greatest danger. And I think today, this is what I was saying earlier in my remarks, there is a tendency to return to the internal security apparatus. I don't speak here about what's happening in the Czech Republic. I don't know enough about it, but I certainly do know what's happening in other democracies. And I think that's a dangerous tendency to reestablish internal security in ways that affect the liberties of individual citizens and their political freedom to speak. I actually, just one more point, going back to Kosovo, when I was the ambassador from the United States to the Czech Republic, this is one of the 2 or 3 biggest issues that I had to address. And I had previously been involved in the Dayton peace process and was actively engaged in human rights investigations in Bosnia in the 1990s. So in a sense, I looked at the Kosovo as a continuation of what had happened in Bosnia earlier, and the need for NATO and Czech Republic, which was a new member of NATO. I was here when the Czech Republic joined NATO, to become involved in this. My only ally on, inside the Czech government on this issue was Václav Havel. I can say that the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, whose names you would know, but I won't say them, they're still around, were deeply concerned or opposing the intervention of NATO in Kosovo for a whole lot of reasons, which I didn't find to be appropriate. I certainly didn't agree with personally, because I was a human rights actor, but also which were opposed to the mission that I had as U.S. ambassador to the Czech Republic. So internal security versus external security is the way I see the difference.
Thank you, John. Gentlemen, we have something like half an hour left, so possibly you may try to react to each other the second round, and then we may open the floor for some questions from the audience. So there's, yeah.
I would have like only very few remarks. What you call like, how was it, like quangos? Quangos. I think it's a fashionable term, but it seems to me it sounds like a French civic society. Have you ever spoke with French NGOs?
I'm a diplomat,
I was like a few times like speaking with French NGOs, and I was like, I realized how much we are impacted by American vision or Anglo-Saxon vision of NGOs, because I suddenly like was speaking with people from French NGO. I remember, I think it was in Portugal 10 years ago, and when I said like that NGOs in Czech Republic are financed by private donors, they were horrified.
Right.
They said like it is unacceptable in France. NGOs must be funded by government or European Commission only. If you are funded by a private corporation, like an NGO, you are suspicious, you are considered not to be independent, that only government sponsorship is guaranteeing independence. So it's completely opposite and it's actually interesting that this country was so much impacted by France and French political culture before the war, before the Second World War, etc. But they really left no trace. To me, like fortunately, because I really much more appreciate like American model of NGO. So it's actually nothing new under the sun. It's French civic society. But with Havel, it's also actually like, and current development, one more remark, he wasn't like such a pusher, but he was a little bit behind the scene, initiating few attempts to undermine the world of and sort of secret and hidden agreements of political parties, all these like initiative like impulse and thank you, you should leave, or I don't translate it properly, and that was whole chain. It always like after a year or two it got dissolved, it lost inspiration, and people got tired, but Havel was very often a little initiator in behind, somehow, sometimes more active initiator, but it never worked. It was just like for a little while, and he said like the society is not adult enough for these attempts. He was very unhappy about it. He was also always dreaming about like new generation of young leaders who will emerge, and was very hopeful about particular people which he named repeatedly, etc. But suddenly now, like, it's a complete perversion. So it's not initiated by Havel anymore, but it's initiated by a rich entrepreneur who comes and starts a movement. He privatizes it from the very beginning. It's and I really myself wonder what Havel would say about Arnold. Like, what do you think, actually?
Yeah, I'm a civil servant. And as a civil servant, I cannot comment on political parties in this country, and it would be a bad taste. And you know, this is again one of concerns that Havel did have about democracy. He was very concerned about the intermingling of party politics with the state apparatus and with the civil service in particular. And we had a fight for 15 years to get a bill on civil service enacted. We actually enacted one in, I think, 2003, because it was one of the preconditions for the entry of the the Czech Republic in the European Union. And when we joined the European Union, the Parliament delayed the date of effectiveness of the law for a year, for I think 7 or 8 years in a row. And so we only, hopefully, there should be a Civil Service Act effective from the 1st of January, but again, it in the end was a result of a compromise which may impair its ultimate effectiveness, and so we will see how that's going to work. But it was one thing that Havel did not like to see the politicians taking over, civil service job. So I honor that, and I was a politician at one time, and everybody who knows me knows that when I was a politician, I was not mincing my words and said what I thought. When I'm a civil servant, I have some limitations that I need to upset. But I wanted to comment on one subtle distinction in what people think and say about Havel, and I think there's a key there to the paradox that Jan has just mentioned. I think he said previously that Havel, in his political activism, was a bit of a director, as a theater director, but then he also noted that he often failed or lost interest in his projects as they developed. And I think he was not. I think he was an excellent playwright. He was a bad director. And what he often did was he started to write a play. He identified the main characters. He imbued them with some ideas, and then, as it happens in a play, the characters start to live a life of their own. And that, I think that was a very fruitful method for him. But when he started to try to direct an event, and we had many instances of that when, in the first 3 years of his presidency, when he tried to push some laws in the effort to preserve the federation and to resolve constitutional questions that we were facing then with our Slovak neighbors. He tried to direct it, and it didn't work. And so he was a playwright first and foremost, and that I also think that is the reason why the one work of art that he directed, namely the movie that he shot in 2010, did not quite work as well as it should have.
Thank you. John, please.
Yeah, building, but not for long, but building on the director analogy and on the question of the actors becoming their own people and not ultimately wanting to be directed. I do think that there was one major, and it's been touched on already, one major flaw in Havel's political leadership, as I saw it. And I did see it I think at a critical time when he had basically just gone to the castle. And that is that he did not, and this goes to the purity of his approach toward politics and the power of the powerless. He fundamentally did not believe in building a political party. And not only not believe in building a political party, but he didn't, I don't think, believe in the elements of political leadership that do require the exercise of power, and power in ways that are sometimes requiring certain degrees of compromise, but certainly exercising influence in ways that if you have a political party, you can exercise influence. And I think the great frustration that he must have felt, because he had the power of the powerless and the power of his own moral perceptions, which were articulated so well and so effectively, that he did not see that get translated into political form. So essentially, the government was kind of taken away from him. Not that he ever necessarily wanted to have it, perhaps, and here I totally defer to the experts to my right, but watching the exercise of political power at critical moments in this early stages, moving toward the European Union and into NATO, and we just spoke briefly about Kosovo, etc., as well as internal organizational issues in the Czech Republic, Havel presented a powerful play, which he wrote and which he started to direct, but he missed the one thing that he needed to be able to direct it, I think, effectively, which is to build a political party. So that's a provocative comment. I think others have already more or less agreed with that, but I see that as a central problem, not in his legacy. His legacy is powerful and is enduring, but in the politics of that time, in the early stages of the development of Czech democracy, that there was no political party coming out of his leadership. That's the way I saw it in any event.
So I believe that now we may ask our guests in the audience to ask their questions, while our three panelists may prepare their short final statement by the end of it. So please, please introduce yourself by your name and position if you'll be asking the question. I don't see too many hands. It may be a comment, not just a question. Yes, please.
Maybe I will follow up on the Czech Republic. I just wanted to ask Mike, I understand that you perhaps tried to convince President Havel to form that party, or what were his reasons not to go that way?
Yes, I wrote several non-papers and position papers on the subject during the time I was in the presidential office, and it was not so much that I tried to persuade him to launch a political party, but I kept saying you need a mechanism, a political machine to translate, what you want to do into laws and policies and whatnot. And it would not necessarily have to be a political party. It could be a grouping of political parties close to the president, like Macháček worked with the Pětka, with the 5 political parties during the First Republic. It could be a movement, but you need a machine. And as things got more and more tense with the constitutional issues, and the system became deadlocked, I urged that we give it some thought, and we, in the end, he agreed to do a a war game. Basically, we went away for the weekend to Lani, to this summer resort. The whole, all of his principal advisors. We divided into two groups, the pro-party group and the anti-party group. And we summed up the arguments for and against the launching of a political machine, and we presented the arguments to him in the end. And he basically agreed with the arguments of the pro-machine party, but he said, "But I'm not the man to do that. I can't do it." Knowing him, I think I knew it all along. I was fighting a losing battle, but I thought,
Good that you tried.
yeah.
Thank you. Alan, you please.
Thank you. Ellen Hume from Central European University. I wanted to touch on another area that was a bit controversial, and that was his decision that there should not be special prosecutions or even investigations into crimes during communism, so that some people were more guilty than others. He didn't seem to want to do that. Was that the right decision? Am I wrong about that? Has Czech Republic paid a price for not having done more in that area?
If I may start, I think Jan also want to maybe, or Tomáš, say something about that. It was not entirely his decision to make. I mean, this is not a presidential system. And he did say in some of his early speeches, in the February 25 speech, 1990, and in others, that those who committed criminal offenses should be punished for the offenses. He did say that, but he was also quite loudly against the principle of collective justice. He was against punishing communists as a group, as a class, just as he was against the principle of collective justice in the case of Sudeten Germans. That was another of the controversies at the time. I would say, and I do say, that he maybe he should have been a little more emphatic on the need to punish those criminally guilty. That, in the multitude of priorities and concerns, this was not as much near the top as maybe it should have. But I would also place a larger part of the blame on the judicial system, which was not only incapable but unwilling to prosecute crimes that have been obviously committed and demonstrably committed, and that could have been prosecuted at the time. That's my take on that.
It's a very complicated topic. It's for one whole conference, so I cannot speak about it in a simple way. But if you look at Iraq after the liberation, so it probably was a major mistake to
Declassify.
Yeah, exactly. So and basically there is a consensus on it these days, probably, that it was a major mistake. Whereas Havel could be considered like someone who made little deals with some generals here and there, and with former communist, whatever minister who was installed like a prime minister. But I don't think that we have genes of Iraqi people or something, or the Czech society of whatever sheikhs is anyhow similar to Iraq mentality. But I think it's actually important to remember it. On the other hand, this sort of major trial with the biggest criminals of the previous regime could have been organized, like let's say 5 years, 6 years after the Velvet Revolution, when it was clear the political transition proceeded quietly and okay. So that, but if it was organized the first few months or a few years after the revolution, I would consider it like very destabilizing and dangerous element. But it's, as I say, it's for a whole conference on its own.
I just recalled a slightly funny incident. I happened to have a dinner the day before November 17. We didn't know what was going to happen the next day, but we had a dinner with a British conservative philosopher, Roger Scruton, and who's known for, you know, at least at that time, he was known for some very radical views, and we didn't know when it was going to happen or how it was going to happen, but we knew already that, you know, Berlin Wall was down, Poland was gone. We knew it was going to happen, and so we were discussing what to do, and Roger said, well, the first thing you have to do is shoot all the judges. And I said, Roger, you know, we wouldn't know how to do it if we tried. You know, this is not exactly our kind of thing. But you know, in the 25 years since then, I thought about it maybe 50 times and thought, you know, maybe not all of them.
It made sense.
But can you imagine that you don't shoot them, but can you imagine that you basically eliminate all the judges at once and install some kind of revolutionary tribunals made of most active dissidents who would be applying to without legal education? I can imagine people like Petr Cibulka or something would be like very active, like revolutionary judges, and I'm glad that it didn't happen.
Yeah. Except, there's a small point. I shared largely this thinking and shared it then. But in the years since, you know, I realized as I spent time in the United States and traveled with Havel, you know, how many people we had, lawyers, judges, colonels, in the Czech exiles around the world, and how much smarter some of our neighbors, the Poles, the Baltic people, Lithuanians, Estonians, were to draw on that reservoir of expertise and knowledge that we, I'm afraid, largely neglected, and I think it was a major mistake.
Can I just make one comment as a footnote, later footnote, during the time that I was here and meeting frequently with President Havel. I had previously just worked on what's known as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which was a commission that was set up to basically investigate the facts and circumstances of the apartheid situation and to get at the truth. There were no prosecutions coming out of that, although there was some reconciliation and that people were provided with compensation, and there were confessions made by those who had committed terrible crimes against the African majority of the country. In any event, I had several interesting conversations with President Havel about this. I was aware of the background that he had decided for various reasons that it was not going to be possible or maybe advisable to go forward with criminal prosecutions of people who had been engaged in major crimes during the communist period. But I did propose to him that maybe what would be useful would be a mechanism whereby a record could be created so that people could understand what had been done. And he was actually quite open to that, although he did distinguish, rightly so, between South Africa and the countries of Central Europe that had been under communism. South Africa having been divided so fundamentally along racial lines, and where civil war was almost certain to have broken out in revolution, had there been no mechanism for reconciliation. Whereas in the countries here, not only the Czech Republic, but other countries of Central Europe, the situation was quite different, where the whole society had been penetrated, all classes and different elements of the society had been affected. And he ultimately said, well, because, I think he said it lightly, but he said in a sense we were all guilty. He didn't mean that, of course, and I made it clear to him that I knew he didn't mean that. But he, well, in the sense that maybe relative differences between people, obviously. But I still think that some form of truth commission would have been good, and still is good. It's something, frankly, that in the United States we haven't fully come to grips with in some parts of our own civil rights background and the terrible legacy of slavery until much later. And we did have in the United States something that I think is akin to this, which is good, which is a truth commission to deal with the internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War, who were put in camps, quite literally, and kept from being able to move around in any way in the country. And that there was a commission created to look at to get at the truth of that. How did that happen, and what effect did it have on individuals? So I think the story is still a live one in this area of truth about the crimes of communism, not only in the Czech Republic, but having lived in a number of countries here, I think the same is true in the other countries.
Thank you, John. The last short question, yes, over there. Yeah.
I have left this country in 1964 and lived in the States the whole time. Please?
Yeah.
I don't need it now. I have.
No, but
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah, I have left in 1964 for the United States and lived there. So I'm Czech American. I'm back now. But I was when the democracy came. I was in the States, and I was just so excited with Václav Havel and coming to. And I have a questions to all of you who knew him personally for many years. Was he thrilled, or was he really terrified to become the president of this country? That's my question.
That's a subject for a novel, not even for a biography, because the elements of it are as contradictory as happens only in novels. He was, I'll try to be very short about it, he was obviously ready for it. He obviously realized that he couldn't avoid taking a role, after preaching responsibility for 20 years, we couldn't now walk away from it. At the same time, he realized what it would do to his writing, what it would do to his private life, etc., etc. He was not happy about that, but and he was a humble enough man that even when he realized that was probably no other way, that he did not push for it. I mean, he let others push for it, and that was. I sometimes teased him about this. I sometimes told him, you are the perfect embodiment of the power of the powerless. I mean, you act so powerless that people will come from all around to help you, and that basically what happened with the presidency, but it was with his full knowledge. I think there's no denying that.
I'm not gonna respond that, but because I wasn't with him at the time. I was good friend with him before in the 80s and later, but during the very revolutionary days, actually, I brought my newly born twins from maternity hospital. I was still a stoker, and I couldn't leave it so easily, like Jiří Dinsby. They called him from the hotel where he was, or metro staff or whatever, like, where are you? And he was already at the ministry, because, but the people were getting cold, and he just left. So it was me. I had to do the heating, I had to take care of it, and so I basically wasn't participating in this revolutionary decision. Plus, I was too young. I was 24, right? So I cannot tell you anything. No first-hand experience.
I recall one important detail, and it's probably not generally well known. When his first 6 months were ending, he organized for himself sort of private opinion poll among the still existing civic forum. And the only question was, should be Václav Havel still president of Czechoslovakia after the first standard election? And it was quite interesting. There were a series of different answers. Prevailing was yes, but a lot of answers were yes, but. And especially people who knew him personally wanted to discourage him a little bit, to give him the chance to become a strong spokesperson of civil society, an independent intellectual, and it's imaginable that this role would suit him pretty well. John, and your impressions when you as a diplomat were meeting a statesman?
Well, he seemed quite comfortable in the castle, I have to say. But it's quite a comfortable castle. And he did an incredible job of transforming it into a magical place, really. I mean, I'd never been in a castle before, so, you know, this is kind of amazing. And all of a sudden, I'm a diplomat coming in. I'll tell just one very short story. When I arrived, and Ellen and I arrived, I presented my credentials to President Havel. And, you know, I walked up this very long staircase to get to the big room, and he was I was the only diplomat, and he was way across the room, and I had to walk all the way over there, shake his hand, and speak the little Czech that I had learned at that stage to him. And he then, you know, we had a formal moment, and then we had an informal moment. And the informal moment was that he took me to the window of the castle, looking out of the castle. And I had only recently arrived, so I wasn't really well oriented. And he pointed down below, and he said, you know, that's your embassy down there. He said, and the flag of that embassy was here, flying all through this very, very bad period, and all the terrible things that happened, because the embassy was still here. And that was very important, he said to me, that the embassy remained here. And he said, now we should celebrate, because it's still flying and they're gone.
Perfect point, final point. I'd like to thank Václav Havel's Library first for organizing this event with Forum 2000. I'd like to thank our panelists, Michael ŽANTOVSKý, děkuju, Honza Macháček, děkuju, thank you, John SHATTUCK, thank you so much. Thank you for coming, thank you for staying with us, and probably next time. Thank you. Thank
I know you have to go, but look, I want to have a book event in Budapest. I want you to come and speak. Well, but I want to have